Yahar! Welcome to the Golden Feather. Grab your pint, a plate, and pick your seats. Your hosts Virtek and Chibi Bree are back from their latest adventure.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Golden Feather. Today is the 27th of January, 2023. We are on episode 153. We called this The Art of Tanking, featuring Iskaruth. How are you today, friend?
I'm doing pretty good today. You know, the live stream and all.
All things considered, it was a decent day.
Is this the happy face?
Glue it on. We'll survive this.
It's like just one of those pieces of paper where you just hold it up.
There you go. See, that's what I want to do.
Against the wall. Just says, help me.
Here's a little behind the scenes talk for you. So we have the VTubers now, and I was talking about wanting to get our artist to make one of those, like, you see the memes with like the NPC character with like a piece of paper or mask like over top of their face. I want to get one of those for my model here. That way when it's like, I can hit a button when I'm having one of those days and be like, yeah, it's totally good. Yeah. But aside from that, the lovely and talented Chibi, how are you today?
I'm doing much better than I was on Monday. Unfortunately, though, it seems like I've given you whatever I caught. So we're both a little bit under the weather. That means we may be sticking to a slightly tighter stream schedule just because Virtek and I have a little bit of a sore throat and it's hard to talk for both of us a little bit. So, but we've dedicated to an hour and a half at most, or at least.
Most, yeah. So I apologize if I accidentally do a cough or whatnot. I'm gonna be trying to mute before I do so, but one might sneak through here or there.
Cartho says you could do ventriloquism.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of what we're doing, right? We talk here, and the model moves over there.
Yeah, kind of.
It's a very advanced ventriloquism. You don't want to know where the opening is.
It's a very expensive ventriloquism.
Yes, this is true. True.
Mom says you're handsome no matter what you screw. Don't listen to Dad.
You're Steven, all good. That's fair enough, Grumpy. Fair enough.
Sean, we will be getting into that in just a moment, but welcome in.
Oh, yes.
Welcome in, everybody. But first, before we get started, we always like to talk about our guest here at the Golden Feather. We are a podcast focused on the community thoughts and opinions on things like the live stream. And as I have seen, a lot of you have a very strong opinion, and we will be getting into that and the opinion of these two wonderful people, because I do not tank. Also, thank you so much, Paradox Gaming. PGN is also part of the reason why we have music behind us. Right now it's from Malord, but also we filter in some of PGN music stuff. So make sure to give him a check out, and welcome in, Uthos.
Yeah, but let's be honest, most of the music on the channel is from PGN.
Yeah, true. Well, this is a great timing. Iskaruth, would you like to explain to everybody who you are and what you plan on doing when Ashes releases, and who's this suspect group? I don't know.
Explain yourself, boy. Explain yourself.
Yes. So on YouTube, I am known as Iskaruth. I do a lot of news broadcasting within the game of Ashes of Creation. Unfortunately, though, we have no game. There hasn't been any spot testing ever since A1 closed, and I've just been on hiatus until I'm able to do more. I know sometimes people are so content brain that they're able to churn out something like every single 2 days or even 1 day, but unfortunately for me, I kind of have the shtick I want to stick to, and I feel like I'd lose that if I was just to do other random content while we had nothing. So I'm dead for now. But I do appreciate the link that you guys posted, hoping people can stick through the hiatus with me like we're sticking through the hiatus for A2.
Yeah. What kind of content do you think you'd be making when the game is live, or were you making back in Alpha 1?
Back in Alpha 1, a lot of the content I was making was generated through people that were messaging me, or stuff that I experienced in the game itself, because I would travel with wherever the large group of people were. Right. And I would make news content based off of that. Usually it'd be like some like silly things. Like, for example, there was one time where Toast, God rest her soul, Toast came in at one moment and had fought and done battle with everybody. She like turned herself into a giant dragon and was fighting everybody. So I made this whole spoof piece on her about how she was like overusing her power as a moderator. Just the general, the truthful storytelling that all journalists do all the time, 100%.
All the time. Every time, guaranteed.
So that's just kind of the stuff that I do. It's a lot of fun, but like I said, it is very much in game, and so I have nothing to go off on. So that's just why I'm on hiatus right now.
That makes sense. And here, because we do content based on the community, we have a bit more to pull from. As you guys will see, we will post out links and stuff to what we're referencing. Usually it's not so focused on just the update. It's kind of what the community is talking about in general. But obviously today, being a very polarizing live stream and also very feeling oriented thing, a lot of people are looking forward to Tank. It's the first one of the year. A lot of people have been waiting to see how the tank looks and works and the updates, so there's a lot to be talked about. I just kind of wanted to preface a little bit. I am a cleric main. I heal usually. My second option would be general support / DPS. Vertec, you do the tanking thing.
Tank, gonna be Vic Tank.
And Eastgirth, what are you planning on playing?
I'm honestly feeling like going summoner right now. I've just had a long history with tanking. Back in my old World of Warcraft days, I used to be the bench tank for my guild during Cataclysm's raiding, and so I have a lot of experience with it, and so I also have a lot to talk about.
And as we've seen, as we get closer to these Alpha 2 reveals, people either love it or they hate it. Actually, Tilly wants to know what a bench tank is.
A bench tank is the same way that it works for football. I do not do anything until the main guy isn't there and they need me. Granted, hold on. I was 15 at the time, so it was my first time ever getting into like some serious content as like a little kid. So I understood why I was a bench tank. I wasn't bad. The other one was just better than me. He was just a lot better than me because he was a 26-year-old man.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well,
sense.
I think we are keeping the people waiting long enough, and I know you're raring to go, Eastgirth. So what do you guys want to tackle first? Is there anything in particular that you're feeling like, just let's get into this topic of it?
Well, I'd like to real quick at least preface, just so you folks know, as was mentioned a couple times, there's quite a few unfavorable comments, and a couple of us definitely have some negative things to say, but we're going to ease into the negativity.
Yes.
Just so you know, we're not going to start full blast into it, but just know that it is coming. We're not going to be all sunshine and rainbows today, unfortunately, like our normal podcast is.
Yeah. I also will say that we like to present negativity or our negative feelings in a constructive manner. And we feel like that is the most productive way. But that's just us. It's more for conversation's sake. There's no reason for us to go at each other and be overly negative with things. I feel like it's easy to get carried away with negative emotion in that case. But I will say, in perspective of how a company is doing, if there were greens across the board, then Intrepid would not be trying hard enough. I like that there is not a green across the board. I like that there's this big feeling of the tank response, and I think Intrepid will appreciate hearing your feedback as well. But again, making sure that your feedback is in a helpful manner, such as being constructive and pointing out what you think should be changed differently instead of just saying it sucks and leaving the game. I think that's just helpful in anything. If you're playing baseball, if you're playing a game, if you're working at a job, it's always helpful to just have that positive response with your negative feelings, if that makes any sense. But yeah, now that that's laid out, Eastgruth, go for it.
So first I want to lay out a little bit. Steven saying that he recorded it at 10:30 a.m. on the Friday of the stream, and that's why there was a pushback. I'm not going to get into the man's life. All right. He's a very busy dude. As a CEO, you're constantly in meetings, you're everywhere all the time. However, there needed to be at least like a day or so, like at the very least a day or so for the recordings to be done, because you don't know what's going to happen with some of the abilities. You don't know if everything's going to be implemented. So it was a really big shoot for them to try to do this 2 hours prior to stream. Mm-hmm. Like, as much as I understand it, I respect they want to keep raw footage for us. It doesn't do anyone any help when you're standing in the middle of a river that sounds like a typhoon and you can't hear the main guy talk about the class that he helped design.
Mm-hmm. And Steven is one of those people, like, he's building this game to have a game for himself, right? And I'm probably going to be very quiet on this tank part because, again, I'm not a tank player. I can only speak to like the visuals of it, but I can't speak to the weightiness of it and how it feels as a tank player. But yeah, I think let me just grab a few things. Like, there's been this sort of feedback very prevalent throughout Steven's gameplays where Goldpipe says, I think showcasing a class should be done by a player as an aptitude to make the gameplay shine, not done by somebody based on their position. And I can agree with you on that aspect. And he did try to preface, like, this is not a marketing thing. However, also to this other point that Magista said, I was more disappointed Intrepid approached the showcase, like the way that they did it. We saw this very similarly to the last one, where it was that longer gameplay thing, and the community, some of them liked it, and a lot of them preferred the previous versions where they had that little cinematic almost feeling with the actions or the spells being used, and seeing it from that perspective with the tooltip nice and big and explaining what the tools are. Now, I know being in development, they're probably not done with whatever the skills are, but if they're going to showcase it, I think they should at least include a little bit of both to appease both people, I think, in my opinion.
I think it would be a lot more clean if they were to do the same exact thing that when they showed tank in A1, the same way that they would show it now, because you can have both. It would be really great to showcase the abilities, what they look like, how it affects certain mobs as a solo tank, and then it would be good to showcase your role in group content, because that's where tanks really shine, is being in group content.
Right. Vertec?
Hey, yeah, I think definitely needs to be some changes in how it's presented. I do agree with the it's not necessarily information that was presented, it's how it was or was not presented. And I 100% agree with the idea that it should not have been recorded right before going live.
Yeah.
It should have been done beforehand. Now, I can say at least the one, it's not even necessarily fully redeeming quality, but maybe the slight light in the darkness off in the corner is that I believe maybe they were trying to make sure that we got the most up-to-date build in case there were maybe some bad bugs or something that were causing some issues, and they wanted to squash those first. I'm kind of hoping that was the case, that if they tried to record something last week, it just would not have gone, and they would have had to say, okay, tank showcase February. But would that have really been a bad thing?
Speaking of bugs, it really did feel like some of the abilities that the tank had were kind of struggling to be used. That one with the double sword, where it said it was like a self buff that caused more aggro generation, but it appeared that every single time Steven had used the ability and then proceeded to basic attack, it wasn't really doing anything. It kept staying on the healer for multiple enemies. It would just not get off and target the tank, and so that kind of makes me feel like there's not a really clear indication on when threat is garnered. Like there's no noise, there's no nothing, just the only visual cue you would have is the enemy facing you.
Right. I want to touch on that in just a second, but I wanted to go back to what Vertex said, and just chat about that for a second, because honestly, maybe getting some of this stuff prepped ahead of time. I get that there's builds going out and things like that, but with me being in the web development sphere, I have builds of apps that I'm building with my boss, and we have a plan for how far we'd like to get before we showcase what we've been working on. And we often have that prepped and ready to go before we're ready to show it, and we have like in mind what we want the features to be in it. And again, it could totally be a situation of, maybe last minute bugs that need to be fixed, but almost in this way, it could benefit them to record and then have that time to say, hey, we need to do another take. Hey, we need to do this better. Because yeah, they did try to, head up the problem ahead of time by saying, by the way, the audio is not like ideal. We did the best we could with what we have, things like that. But this kind of would then provide them a wider time frame, like give it about a week or so. Make sure you have the video ready about a week or so in advance, and that gives you that time to redo it, to make sure you fine tune everything, things like that. And I mean, I ended up having to turn down the stream myself because when there's not combat, it's not horrific. It's very comfortable to listen to, but as soon as the combat came in, it was extremely loud. So just being aware of that, like I turned it down. But I think if they had given themselves more time, they could have flat out muted stream. Yeah. And so like that's the reality. As streamers, we have to make sure our audio is good. We have to make sure that we're leveled well. Yeah, exactly. That river was so loud. By the way, hello Annie, welcome in.
Well, yeah, definitely saw the comments about, hey, more river, more water.
Yeah, and there was times where I was struggling to hear Steven over the water. And for me, I come from a perspective where the audio of people is hard for me to differentiate, especially in a loud environment. And so providing a loud environment made it harder to focus on what they were saying in the stream. I know that they're re-recording it now and getting it polished for the YouTube version. But I just think maybe if Intrepid spent a little bit more time ahead of time getting the right stuff prepped, they wouldn't have to do it so last minute. And it would give their editing team a little bit more time to get a handle over stuff. But that's just some constructive feedback that I have, is like maybe take a moment longer, prep it up a little bit better, like in advance, and then you have that time. You could just drop it right in. But yeah, exactly. Steven has gear now. Yeah. But going back to your point, Iskarith, about remind me again what you said exactly, because there was something with what you said that I was gonna run off of from there.
So I believe it was his 2, and his 2 they had discussed was a buff that applied a damage, or it applied more threat to the abilities that were used against enemies. But every single time he had used that ability, I would notice that he would just start basic attacking and not use any other abilities. So I was kind of curious on whether or not that ability was functioning like it was supposed to, because a lot of those enemies in the early game were focusing primarily on the healer and never on Steven. And as much as we joke about the fact that he uses God mode and uses GM hacks so that he can showcase a little bit better, you can't really do that with GM hacks and threat because, well, I mean, as far as I know, I'm not a GM, so I don't know if there's an ability to give you like infinite threat or whatnot, but there's only so much that you can do as a tank when you're only given one threat generation.
Yeah.
And like, because I was in my Discord, we were talking about how he needed a ranged, he needed an AoE, he needed a single target taunt. He needed like a more than just an applied buff that increases your threat generation in order to hold aggro. So while we can make fun of the fact that Steven is a mouse clicker and he doesn't use his rotation like he's supposed to, I feel like the abilities showcased in general were very lacking in terms of like a tank's proper rotation you would find in other games.
Yeah, I could see that. Vertek, you're the other like tank person here. What is your feedback on that?
My feedback is kind of the same thing it was for the cleric video, which was that I think Steven, if he's going to be the person doing the demo, he should really sit down with the people who have sculpted the class and have kind of mastered the current state of it and how they're supposed to work together and really go over everything, and if anything, like post-it note some ideas for himself on top of his monitor, so that he can, hey, use this one and then that one for the best effect, and this is why. Okay, don't forget that as a tank, you need to be using your threat abilities at all times, and your knockdown, your CC stuff, the things that the tank has been spoken of being a master of, right? Like, keeping people safe. Like the one ability he did use a lot, I like the visual design of it, I like the idea of it, but I think it's very situational, and I think it got way overused for the situations. But I do believe because it was such a flashy skill, that may have been why it got more use, and that was that big frontal cone shield thing, which would be great if a dragon was going to be like blasting on the raid. Yeah, get behind me, it's coming in, it's going to be aimed at everybody no matter what, so I'm going to protect you.
Yeah.
But for standard issue.
The one caveat I can give Stephen, though, is that ability looks kind of similar to the Final Fantasy XIV Paladin, where they would have wings on their back, but unfortunately they stop attacking, they stop being able to generate aggro. So while it is a really neat ability, the idea around like this big mitigation for your allies is a really cool idea, and I like that. It unfortunately falls flat on its face when you're unable to generate the aggro in order to get back on track, because that's supposed to be the tank panic button. But if you're unable to get back on track and hold aggro after using the ability, then there was no point in using the panic button in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, it's also like that grit ability. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Chibi.
It's okay. I just want to really quick touch on something that Snicker said in the chat. Snicker says the cherry on top is that they lied about technical difficulties to record this video last moment. It says on the video 10:30 a.m. on Friday, so the stream should have started 30 minutes ago. I'm not trying to white knight, it's just more of devil's advocate, if you will. We don't know what tech difficulties they had. Maybe it didn't record properly, maybe it didn't render properly. We don't know. I know that Vertek and I have had streams where we're live fine, but then the video recording we have afterwards is kind of messed up and we have to find a way to fix it. Or for some of our episodes, we were unable to recover it whatsoever. So technical difficulties do happen, and maybe they were rushing a little bit to re-record, I guess. But I wanted to put that out there as a different perspective. Not really defending. Yes, they pushed back the stream. That's not a very good look. And also pushing back the stream in combination with this, it's hard. It's one of those, it doesn't look the greatest HR or like PR wise,
It's also the other thing to keep in mind is the waiting until the morning of can also introduce things like, let's say they were trying to get the most recent build, right?
Yeah.
And that happened to complete like yesterday or even this morning, for crying out loud. And then they found out that there was an issue that they needed to fix up really quick. So, hey, fix this thing and push it out again. Or no, this isn't going to work. We gotta re-record this. Let's go back to the last build. Yeah. And that's the another issue that can pop up with waiting until the last minute, is you never really know what you're going to get when you're trying to cram everything down to the last minute.
Absolutely. And I know like with doing rating and stuff, we've done some of our rating stuff pretty well. And then we get to a point where like, oh man, okay, guys, we got to get through this. And then mistakes become bountiful because you're rushing, right? You're like trying to get through it real quick. And then there's constant mistake after mistake. I'm not necessarily saying that's what's happening here. I'm just also saying that could be a thing. But to Grumpy's point, yes, perceptions are a reality, and this is a bad reality, meaning like first impressions really stick. And this was not a very good first impression of the tank video, as is seen very easily through your responses and our responses and the ones on the forums and the Reddit. And I'm staying neutral because this is not my stake. I don't have a stake in the tank thing. My stake is all on the visual side, which we will get to after the tank stuff. But I wanted to give the tank people, a good chance to chat about this, since most of it was on, tanking updates and stuff like that. So, Tilly, I grabbed that. We will chat about that in just a moment. But yeah,
and Teal makes a good point.
I agree.
By the way, yeah, they could have literally just said, "Hey, we're sorry, the video didn't work out so well. We wanted to show you the video today. I know you're waiting on it and you're gonna be disappointed, but let's go ahead and talk about what we're gonna be showing you, and show you some pictures." Question mark. I don't know what else they could have done.
Too.
Yeah, they could have just released the video.
Pushed them.
They have.
Or even exactly, even that. Like, hey, we're gonna, February's gonna have 2 streams.
You know what? I just had an idea. It might be a perfect storm. You have this December live stream that happens, right? And it's for me personally, it felt like a glorified recruitment video, because it showed a lot of the offices, it showed a lot of the people that were behind the team. I get it. I completely do. You need to recruit more people. They've been constantly hiring ever since they started. But however, that was a very, very, very carefully curated video that they had probably weeks to develop and post on December, and then to move on into the January live stream, and we get half-baked 2-hour recording, whatever the case may be, and the fact that they might have everything broke down, they didn't get the video rendered, they lost the files of the video, because that happens. So
right.
Recording and editing videos, I know that sometimes you just lose files and you're unable to make the thing you originally made. However, it would have then been the perfect time for them to push it a couple days, something, I don't know when they would have had a time in their schedule, but it would have been a lot better than the reality that we're now in, that we get something carefully curated the month prior, and then we get something that feels extremely half-baked and like they didn't care.
Yeah. And I'm just going to highlight a couple other things that you guys in chat are saying. And thank you so much for giving us your feedback. We accept your honest feedback here. Like, we're not going to tell you what to think. We're here to hear you, essentially. And, all I'm going to do is point out opposite opinions or opposite perspectives, but that doesn't mean that I don't agree with you necessarily. I'm just pointing things out. But this comment by Elias says they made it worse by saying how long they felt it had been between live streams. Surely then that's prep time. I mean, a little bit of a problem there is that it's about 2 weeks for them to be off with their family. So it's an early December live stream followed by a couple of weeks for family and then the normal times. But again, we've already made the comment on, we think they should have a little bit more prep time ready for themselves. But yeah, actually, thank you so much, Levi. I was going to bring up what Snuckers was going to say. For those of you that were not part of Alpha 1, am I running for political office? No. For those of you that were not part of Alpha 1, Alpha 1 did drop gear too. Actually, Vertec and I were called cheaters because somehow we ended up killing a mob. We just decided to farm mobs one time, and they forgot to take out the dev gear, and we ended up with dev gear, and so we had more health than the devs did. And at one point in the Alpha 1 video, they're like, wait, how does Chibi and Vertec have more health than we do? And they had forgotten to take that out, and so everybody called us cheaters for it. But yes, They did. So what Sneckers is saying is, what about all the base principles broken in the stream? Non-tradable gear. What happens to nothing will be bound to the player? Weapons and armor dropping from mobs. What happened to mobs only drop crafting items and won't drop equipment? This is all for testing purposes.
Well, also, this is one that I was going to be happy to respond to, because I don't want to feel totally like a negative Nancy. So I want to have something that I can be like, hey, well, here's actually what's happening. The gear binding thing, they said most gear was going to be not bound on pickup, but some would. That very well might be something that is bound. Mm-hmm. We don't know. But yeah, still questionable, not going to lie.
Yeah.
But the weapons and armor dropping from mobs, they did say it was going to be contextual, so you wouldn't find swords dropping from bears. Mm-hmm. But if there's a literal plate armor creature that you're attacking, I could totally see picking up plate armor from that. So
it makes sense environmentally, and that's exactly what Stephen, he's put environment as the forefront, which is why we have such a beautiful environment today versus getting it later in like a beta 1 or beta 2. So he's very fixated on that, and I can absolutely see getting the plate armor from plate drops. I do give him that he likes to try to contextualize this world as much as he can, mm-hmm. so that you're not finding the Last Dead Adventurer's clothes inside of a wolf's belly.
Yeah. I also wanted to say on that note, visual cues, right? We're seeing here the video. For those of you that didn't watch it, I would honestly say either watch it here, because this is about the extent of it, except for they're having conversation on top of it. But just as a heads up for those that have not watched it yet, it will be very loud, so make sure you put your volume down, especially when combat begins. But for me, and I have loved the visual, what the fighter is doing with the swoopies. I've loved that going thus far. But for me, these effects are a little too bright / not tuned out well. It feels like it is blurring your view perspective, because you're just seeing this light and then kind of this extra blur around that light, especially from the lightning and other things. It made it really hard to see through that. And somebody made, actually, I'm gonna grab this person's comment, but it makes it really hard to see through that. And if you imagine something like a castle siege, how are you going to be able to keep track of who's doing what and on things like that? This is kind of going back to my feelings. I think you should mainly only be able to see the stuff that you do as effects, and turn off everybody else's. But I think, in my opinion, they need to tone down the visual effects of this stuff. What are your thoughts?
As a tank, it's a little bit of a middle ground for me, because when you're playing something like PvP, you want to know what the enemy is doing at all times. And I feel like if you remove those visual cues, you kind of remove a little bit of that pre-guessing of what their combo is going to be and what they're going to be using on you, so you can use your mitigations in tandem. It's definitely a weird way to try to balance. I feel like there should be some sort of slider in order to maybe produce the bloom or the effects of any of the abilities that you or any other person is using to kind of help aid that. But I also don't want to entirely remove it, because then that removes the sort of visual cue to you as the player that, hey, this person is about to slam me with one of the hardest abilities in their class. I need to prepare to try to mitigate that as best as I can, or shut them down.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and me, I'm kind of hoping that what they're doing in this showcase with the amount of visuals is the max. This is they're aiming for the maximum, and then they're going to start being able to dial things down in ways from there. They're aiming for this is the full tilt visuals, and there's going to be a slider that goes up to 10, and you can knock it down to 9 or 8, and you can tell raids do not turn it down past 3, below 3, because anything below that, you're not going to see the whatever on the ground, or insert whatever effect that they need to see and cue on. Just don't turn it down below 2. If you turn it down to 1, you're going to miss this thing, you're going to stand in it, and we're going to kick you.
To respond to Olivia Jima's comment about the visuals in a 200v200, this kind of goes back to Steven's whole thing about wanting the environment to tell you what's happening, either through the drops or through the visual cues that some of the abilities do. I don't believe it's a very good idea if you were to turn them all the way down to 0 in something like that, because there's just the feeling of chaos in the battle. I'm a sucker for visuals. Like that's the reason that Ashes hooked me into the first place, and just being able to see the chaos of battle is more than enough for me to keep it on, despite the fact it looks like just nothing but bloom effects happening on your screen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Grumpy Old Man, you have a point, because Grumpy Old Man in chat just said if they had labeled this as first pass tank play video instead of tank showcase, the reaction expectations may have been properly set. And I saw from Elias, like, yes, most of us are pretty aware this is pre-alpha 2. This is not anything that is finished. This is not the final product. We're aware of that. But this is the only feedback I can really give on the tanking stuff, which is why I brought it up. And also, as a web developer, I work on the front end, so I'm a very visual person. But yes, Wizzy, I loved the nature reacting. That's not very flashy. I like that there's ways that they're showing that that crack on the ground when he's attacking, or the wind blowing the grass over. I like those effects because those are subtle and yet obvious, where they're not very flashy. They don't all need to be super flashy.
Yeah. I think, by the way, since you brought it up, and it was kind of mentioned earlier, but I wanted to go into more detail whenever it came up again. The hammer swinging, I think they're on the right track with it for the feeling, but I think it's like when you see a picture and the contrast is turned up way too high and you don't realize exactly what's wrong, you just know something's wrong, but the whites are too white and the blacks are too black. That's kind of what's happening. Like, it swings too fast in the middle and then pauses too long at the end.
Okay,
so
this is actually perfect.
Like smush it in just a little bit, like make it start up slower and then swing and then slow down at the end, and then start up slower and swing and slow down at the end, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tilly was actually asking, am I the only one think the hammer attacks were a bit too fast for how big the weapon was?
It is. It is a very beefy weapon.
And I like the direction they're going with it. Like, yeah, definitely show some weight to it. But I think it almost has like not even Thor implications, where it's like, yeah, it looks like a weighty thing, and then he swings it so fast. Because even Thor doesn't swing it that quickly.
Right.
And he's literally a god with a weapon that does his will.
A lot of people putting Thor too, like Thor's hammer, excitement for that. But no, I mean, to me, with how heavy that looks, it looks like it should be a two-handed weapon. To me, because in my mind, a hammer that's one-handed would be about the size of a mace, maybe slightly larger.
In order to bring perspective into real life, hammers that were used one-handed were generally looked like how a hammer would look nowadays, where they would have a pretty small metal top, but the whole point was that it packed a really big punch because it was this big old ball of metal. Instead of like something sharp like a sword. However, with what they're going for in this more like stone maul style, where it's this big hunk, like rectangle on top of the whole thing itself, it definitely feels way too light to look at. And if we're going to talk about the use of environment and visuals, as Steven likes to do, it has to really hone in on how it looks and feels to the player when you're swinging something faster than Thor.
Yeah, exactly. Wolf of Gar says they look pretty much like a framing hammer in size. Elias says also you don't really finish a swing behind your back. You don't really start the finish of a swing, I think is what they're trying to say. I'm not really sure. I'm sorry. I've ruined that completely.
That's a little confusing.
What was it?
Start or finish. You don't really start or finish a swing behind your back. Thank you. I do my best to correct in my head what it's supposed to be, but there's a lot of options there. But,
unless you're using a bow staff, in which case that's different.
yeah. The scary thing is that there are so many things wrong at its core. I don't know what Intrepid has to do to fix that. I mean, in general, combat just feels bad. Okay, I want to just highlight that real quick because in Alpha 1, people had a lot of issue with the way that the combat was, and they changed a very little bit of things, and it made a huge difference, and people just were like, oh my gosh, it feels weightier now, and they're like, I didn't even really adjust that part. Like, it changed so much, the smallest little change. So I think that's what they still need to fine tune. But I think that's where having public view like this and getting your guys' feedback and our feedback is going to help them immensely, because all they have to go off of is what's being talked about inside the company until they show it, right? So I think that it's a lot of stuff that's going to be needing to be reworked, but at least they have stuff. Yeah, like Snecker says, sure, now it's better than A1, but they can't go for... They can definitely go for another rework, yeah. Like a slight rework, maybe not a full rework, but I mean, I think maybe the base is there. It needs some fine-tuning. That's just from an objective, not tank person's perspective. This person hits on a lot of things that we're going to be kind of hitting on. And I wanted to share that. This is from Nova Chrono from the forums, who didn't really enjoy a whole lot of it. They did feel like Steven should have started off the stream with the tanky armor and the shield. I think they were trying to showcase, like, look, this armor can drop, that, like, this is how the loot table works. But maybe they could have at least started with like a lower grade tank set that still was like a set, and then upgrade by fighting. That may have been better. I'm not quite sure. They felt like the weapons were weightless. They were kind of unhappy with like the skills because they don't have more than 2-second cast time. I think that's just specifically so that they can spam it to show you what the skills do. They felt like there was too many effects and it was too fast of gameplay. A lot of you guys were saying that with the hammer swinging very quickly. There's no weight behind the gameplay, so a hammer of that size probably should be a little slower. And the thing that I wanted to get to was add an indicator. This is what I agreed with, because as somebody who does play DPS or healing, right? Healer threat is a thing. Who has aggro? How much aggro do I have? That is what I was trying to determine from watching the stream. And the easiest way you could tell, and Eastworth, you said this earlier, was who is the person that they're fighting facing? Who had the aggro? How do I know if I'm gaining aggro? How do I know if I'm not gaining aggro? It would be nice to see something that responded to how much aggro Steven was getting or was losing.
Yeah, see, and aggro meters are a good thing for everybody. If nothing else, even for a healer, even not to worry about how much aggro they have. But tank's about to die. They're going to die. It's guaranteed. Who's it going to go after next? Who do I need to pre-heal and hot up? Mm-hmm. Like, that's stuff you need to worry about. Is a DPS getting too close? Can we call out and you let them know, like, dude, it's starting to get angry. It's starting to look at you. Better chill out.
Some of the ways that Final Fantasy kind of does this, and I only bring it up a lot because I've been playing it a lot recently, is that they'll have a enemy list that happens whenever you start a fight, and they'll have the color indicators right next to the name of each of those enemies, with red being they're on you, orange being they're close, yellow is not so close, and then green for no possible way you'll grab aggro from them. So it's very important as a tank for you to be all in the red. Every single one of those enemies should be red on that bar for you. And then they also have a visual and audio cue, where the visual would be a line from the enemy would come out from them, go to you, and you'll also hear a high-pitched noise that they're on you. So I can take that a lot better than just a standard aggro meter with like a percentage on how much aggro they are on you. But it was just the fact that we needed something, and I don't feel like them facing you is enough, because there was a mage on that bridge. If you remember the video, there's a mage on the bridge who was using a lightning ability, and I was like, this is weird. It's like they're attacking the archer. I don't know why Steven isn't able to grab aggro on this guy. And then I noticed that the mage then swapped over to the fighter. And that's when me and other people in the Discord were speculating, well, maybe it's not the fact that he doesn't have aggro. Maybe that this is an enemy that uses an ability that has like a random number generator, and then they throw out lightning bolts to random people in the party, regardless of aggro, which is a really good design. And I would be happy with that. But we just had no way of knowing, because there was zero cue on whether or not you had aggro, except for they were facing you.
Right. Real quick before Vertec gets into it, I kind of wanted to highlight a little bit of a thread going on in the chat right now with Elias and a few other people.
Oh yeah, by all means.
Elias, huh?
I said, oh yeah, by all means.
Okay, so Elias says his DPS would have given him the time to get aggro. That ranger kept pulling when he liked. And then Snucker says, I mean, Steven was not using his abilities to gain threat, so I think it's not only design issue, it's also a skill issue. And then Levi says, they did several times. DPS died every time they did this. They also specifically previewed the stream talking about tanks pulling aggro off of other classes. And then Elias says, you're not wrong, but he just didn't use his abilities until someone explained about the shield block and knockdown. Your point about someone playing who knew the class, not Steven, is totally correct. And we've seen this a few times, where I think maybe this is such a new build that Steven hasn't had time to actually sit down and play it and gotten used to it and things like that. And I think that it's kind of like anybody picking up a game and trying to tank live on the go, while recording. And that's kind of how it comes off to me, at least. I know if as a non-tank player, I would probably be just key smashing and hoping I figured it out. But also that's maybe where sitting down, and this is what I've been learning with my newer classes and getting better at playing my classes, sit down, look at your abilities, figure out what your abilities do, and go from there. I've been taking more time just reading and saying, okay, this does a debuff on the target, and if I have this debuff and I do this other thing, it does more damage versus without that debuff on there. And so I like that, sitting there and learning your abilities and reading how they work together. I think that's really important. But Ashes of Nair says, Steven did clearly improve during the stream, but for a showcase, I don't think that's the way to go, like we discussed earlier. And if you're trying to do a POV of somebody learning how to play as they go, sure, absolutely. But I think also maybe picking a class that you've played and let somebody else kind of take the hot seat, of who's been working on that and who's been playing that as playtesting it, or that's their play style, things like that. I think that would be better, because then you're able to see it. I get it. It's not coming from that person's perspective. It's coming from Steven's perspective. But I honestly think it might be nicer to see somebody else doing that, and then seeing like, okay, can you explain what you just did? Can you explain why you use that now? And things like that. Yeah, that's just my input on that. Sorry for the lengthy response. Vertec, go ahead.
Yeah,
We were talking about threat, by the way, still.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
Well, first, just to, I guess, reply to Levio. Levio's comment, yeah, I think that may have been a bad decision too. Let's assume that was for real, and he was legitimately playing poorly for entertainment value. But you're trying to showcase a tank and what it can do. You should be showcasing a tank and what it can do, instead of trying to get laughs and whatnot, instead of entertainment value. But with threat, see, here's the fun thing. Like, I was one that made the comments that, you know, yes, tank should have to fight for threat. It should be an active, engaging process, like trying to make sure that you're doing the proper angry buttons while also performing your job and keeping the rest of the raid safe. That's your job, is to keep them safe, right? The healer's there for when stuff goes out that you can't control, and to also keep you alive so you can keep everyone else safe.
Yeah.
Now, part of keeping them safe is controlling the boss. So part of that is making sure that they're angry at you.
Right.
So I said on the forums, like, yeah, it should definitely be an ongoing thing through the fight. It should be something that you have to manage, not just set it and forget it and do 100 times the threat everybody else does, and you just slash dance for the rest of the thing and throw out a CC every once in a while and call it a day. That's to me, that's not really tanking.
You see, normally I would find Steven's like little quirks with playing the game as endearing for the most part, but unfortunately for someone like a tank, you can't really play your tank like a tank unless you know the abilities that you're using. And to say that you were playing bad on purpose just to elevate the entertainment of it really just makes the people who play tanks more frustrated, because it's not giving us what we want, which is we want to see how a tank functions so that we can better understand what we're going to be getting into when we actually are able to use the tank.
Yeah.
So to have this entertainment value, I can understand, because he did that with the ranger, he did that with the cleric, because he could. He wasn't the main line of defense for the other players, so he could have this little bit of silliness where he's clicking or he's not using the abilities properly because it didn't mess with the whole team. But it just felt like a slog sitting through the video, because they were constantly having issues and like zero cohesion between the team because the tank wasn't able to use the tank abilities properly.
And I kind of want to disagree with you a little bit. I can agree with you on the ranger perspective, but he was also solo in that video, so there was nobody relying on him. But also, as a DPS, you have a bit of a larger room for error margin. However, as a cleric, I was a little bit frustrated because, I mean, as a cleric, you have to be on top of that. You have to make sure your party is alive, things like that. So, like, for me, two of the biggest important rules are tank and heals, because the tank's got to keep the damage, the heals got to keep everybody up, and as long as the DPS is working together and tries to stay out of stuff, it's decently easy. But I definitely understand where you're coming from with the tank perspective. You know, if my perspective of if this is a showcase, I am not discriminating against DPS. I play DPS, okay? If you do good DPS, the thing dies faster, okay? My job is to keep you alive so you can keep doing the DPS. That's my job. I'm fighting your health bars. He's fighting the threat meters. Y'all are fighting the boss.
Right, it's all about the team cohesion.
Exactly.
It's what the biggest thing came from. Is like, I see some people in chat commenting about how you would not let a subpar player play the way that they do without getting kicked after a while. And it's a little bit on the nose for that one, because you can't really expect people like right off the bat to know exactly what they're supposed to do as a tank, because maybe they might just start getting into it. They've never played a tank in this game before, because when I first started tanking through Final Fantasy, I didn't really know what I was doing, even though I've tanked in WoW before. It's a completely different beast. But I mean, even if you like give them the advice and then they proceed to not do it, then I can understand the kick, because they need more time outside of a group event in order to learn how to play the class. I'm not really one for just like, dude, you're subpar, you didn't use your mid like 0.2 seconds before you were supposed to, so we're gonna kick you. It's just one of those weird things where it felt a little demeaning to tanks from what I saw. Just
and
because
I can get that perspective too. But
and sorry to circle back on what I was saying.
Definitely.
The tank skills, even with what I was saying on the forums, like I want threat to be a challenge. We still don't know exactly how well these skills work, because they didn't really showcase the skills. But if you notice, they were also kind of counterintuitive to how hard it looks like it is to keep threat with just pushing a couple threat buttons. It didn't really grab threat and hold it. You would have to keep actively working on it. Yet there's the one ability with the big bubbly shield And then there's the one grit that actively lowers your threat. You can take more damage.
I remember that you said that, and the PTSD came waving in on me. You build up this courage, which increases your threat generation, and yet you use an ability which increases what it does, like a lot of damage. You get more mitigation, but it decreases the main thing as a tank. You need your mitigation, and if you're already struggling so hard to keep aggro, let's say perfect world, Steven was playing perfectly, the rotations were perfect, but the aggro generation was just not there. Why would you ever use this one singular ability that is going to actively hinder you? Because it doesn't matter how much mitigation you can get from using that ability. If you're not being targeted, you're not going to be taking the damage. So there's no point in using the ability because you're not able to hold the aggro.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, because it said something along the lines of like greatly increases mitigation but decreases movement speed and damage output. And if you're struggling to keep threat after even those times where you did the shield bash and then the ground slam, I mean, granted, we're all talking right now about the a game. It's still in alpha, etc., etc. Testing to proceed forward. So I mean, they could just be for like a better term, placeholders, but still, I would hope a first pass. And yeah, thank you, Boshi, by the way. Even first pass, it should have, I think, been a little bit more intuitive with that, because there should be a little bit more of a threat magnifier if one of your main skills to mitigate damage is going to reduce the threat you can do for the next 10 seconds or however long it's going.
Yeah, I could see that. And actually, thank you. By the way, if you guys highlight stuff like that, I don't have to go and add it in. It automatically adds it into our little tool here. So thank you so much, Wolfgar, for highlighting your comment. But Wolfgar says, to answer that, I feel like the grit ability seems like a tank swap ability. Pop grit for increased mit and allow off tank to take aggro, which I could absolutely see it in that perspective. Like there's going to be reasons for you to remove aggro from yourself, and potentially even if you are tank something else and you're the off tank, going with the idea of tank being primary tank just because it's only called tank. I am happy Steven seems to be considering a different name for that, at least in game, but it's just one of those things where it's useful, but maybe not in the exact scenario that they were in. And real quick, Overthrow, I see your thing. I wanted to come back up here. Somebody else had something that they were talking about that goes really well into that. And that was... Oh man, I lost it. Sorry, you guys can keep talking. I'll look through this.
To cut up a little bit of the negative feedback that we've been giving out so far. What I can give Intrepid Studios is that there is consistent progress. While this one might not have been something that was very good, and we all have a lot of problems with it, especially for me, it's the abilities. I just feel like there's just not enough abilities that a tank should have. We can at least give them that there is steady progress to the game, and we're still seeing that. It just might not be the progress that we do want to see, because then that means they have to go back and change things, and that causes more time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
don't think I grabbed it. Dang it.
It's all right. I got something I wanted to reply on here, because it's been hanging out in my mind for a while, and somebody actually commented. Levio Jima said, in response to Sneckers saying the shield ability is going to be useless in PvE but useful in PvP, because the PvE DPS should not stand next to the tank. That was my first knee-jerk reaction, but at the same time, we have no idea how they're going to be building the encounters and such. I mean, for crying out loud, they have purposely built the healer to go in and start punching things in the face with a mace, and in 2 videos now with the shield as well. So they very well could be building things where there's not going to be a lot of AoE swipes and stuff like that. And it doesn't matter where people stand except for maybe behind to get a bonus on damage if they're a melee.
Yeah.
But that's also a maybe. Who knows if they're actually going to do that or not. I would assume yes, because it just makes sense. It's in every fighting game situation, be it tabletop or digital, that, you know, if you're flanking somebody and their attention is split, you're going to do more damage because you're not paying attention behind them as much.
Yeah.
That's just how it works.
Thank you, Fauci. I'm glad you like the overlay and our VTubers. We actually are working on another one in the background. We'll have it ready for you soon.
I'm a VTuber as well. I'm a really high-end model though. Like this is a solid $3,000 for my model. Yeah,
at minimum. But this is kind of what I was trying to bring up earlier. I forgot who said it, but somebody was talking about the active blocking not being very engaging in terms of gameplay, something about it being boring. I thought I grabbed it. I think maybe I lost it somewhere. Oh no, actually, every time Wolf of Gar says every time Steven would use active blocking, it was boring to watch. Imagine playing it. Active blocking should not be a thing for tanks. And I kind of wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. But also adding to that, Overthrow says active block is another hindrance to your aggro generation. I have a feeling we will see some big ability revamps in A2. Some of these class kits don't make sense as is. And that's the interesting thing, because in the stream, he says that it's supposed to increase your threat, not decrease it. And
that, you know what, all like 4 of those things that I need to reply to all kind of work together. I've always thought that there was a lost opportunity for tank threat generation with mitigation. Like, mitigation should totally increase threat. Like, okay, this person's avoiding my stuff, I'm more angry at it. In theory, because there's also if you're going against a player, you're going to say, hey, this person's mitigating all my stuff, let me go after the person keeping them alive. But outside of that, the active blocking thing, I can say I'm a big fan of games that do active blocking, quote unquote, right, where it's an actual choice between mitigating some damage or continuing to do threat, and you have a limited amount of block that you can do before you have to take it down. You can't stand there and active block for 30 seconds straight, because your arm's gonna get tired if nothing else.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like, and this is going to be the only time I'm going to praise Terra ever, is that for their tanks, the way that their blocking works is it's a separate resource that they have, and depending upon what hits them, how much damage it's supposed to do, it gets rid of that resource and you're eventually unable to block anymore. That's going to be the only praise that I give that game.
Yeah.
However, I feel like the active blocking should be delegated for specifically blocking big hits instead of it being all the time, because the basic attacks on a tank shouldn't be doing half of his health. But the big, like we're seeing right now with the boss, the big twirl that he does, the whole link spin.
Yeah.
I can see that as an application for using the block, because that's going to be doing huge damage, but you also don't want to be moving the target while that's happening either.
Right.
Because that means that's less aggro that you're going to be generating by doing auto attacks on it or by taking the hit with your active block. So it's a lot better to just stand there and take it than to, I don't know, press a button for a 20% mitigation and just stand in it and eat it.
And that's the other thing I wanted to bring up is we saw that Steven used his tank shield ability, but also it is the duty of a tank, in my opinion, as a healer. It is the duty of the tank to know where your party is, and if you have that shield up, you need to be shielding your party. Sure, they had that little bit of a back and forth tiff kind of joke about like the party needs to keep up with the tank, but also at the same time, if the tank is constantly moving around everywhere, I have no idea where you're going, but that shield is not up for a very long time. And Steven is very scared of dying, and you see him kind of running away after popping the shield and being like, I've got the shield. And then, the healer is trying to like heal, and it's kind of it's not very easy. If you're running one direction, your DPS is running another direction. It's like, where do I focus as a healer? And it's one of those things where I don't know. What are your thoughts? Should you stay in place and keep that shield up in one location, or should there be at least some communication like, hey guys, I'm going to go to the right or left, and then expect your party to follow along with you?
I'm going to follow up that question with another one. What are they going to do about evasion tanks? Are they going to be required to have shields? I feel like if you're going to offer different sides of the coin for tanking, whether it be evasion or it would be armor or it would be blocking, I feel like there needs to be a little bit more communication on that, because they've discussed in tandem about the secondary class system that you're able to pick out, and how you can pick like a ranger and a tank, and then now you are more focused on your evasion rather than your ability to block. It's just it's one of those weird things where I like the idea of active blocking, but does that now mean that every single tank needs to have a shield, or else they're not mitigating properly?
Right.
Yeah, and see, yeah, I think like Ashes of Nera, it depends entirely on the encounter. If you're gonna stay in one place or move, but there should always be the communication. Like if a tank's gonna move, they need to let everybody know, because that's one person deciding how every other person in the raid/party needs to adjust. So that one person needs to communicate out, hey, I'm moving him to my right, just so you know. Or, hey, I'm going to keep kiting around backwards in a circle because they keep dropping flames on the ground or whatever.
Right.
But, yeah, the different types of tanks would end up kind of doing that differently. And they have at least confirmed that every class is going to have an active block of one type or another, using whatever weapons they have. So evasion tank could still use like I imagine maybe lighter weapons, and they'd be able to do like a quick light block instead of trying to depend on their evasion, maybe.
Yeah, that was something that I didn't know. I thought it was only shields that could block. Okay, so that answers my question.
So I'm going to follow that up with a question from Levi, or is it Livio Jima? Says, can we discuss how Aegis encourages players to have bad positioning, since you want people behind the boss and not the tank? So Aegis is the name of that move, by the way. For those of you that did not watch. That I think
I touched on earlier when I was saying it's going to kind of be a very circumstance-based, like situational skill. I don't think it's going to be used quite as often as he was popping it, because you're going to want people to be positioned for their best advantage, no matter what that is, whether it's behind you or whatever. So basically it's going to end up being hey, there's going to be a directional AoE ability coming out. It's going to explode over there, and it's going to hit all of you. Stand behind me, I'm going to pop this, so I take some of your damage.
Yeah.
That's basically the situation.
The Aegis seems like it's something that should be used in conjunction with active blocking, almost. Like when you need to grit down and bear it, you pop the Aegis and your active blocking behind it. You take a reduced amount of damage, and it shields your party at the same time.
I could see it. I also see it as a sort of thing to be used in specific boss mechanics, where there are like arena-sized abilities that the boss is using that it's going to cause damage to everybody, and it's a lot better if they were to be behind the tank, because they'll take it instead.
Right.
But it's not something that I would like to see as like an A2 ability, because I mean, unless they're going to be having a lot of arena-wide abilities used by some of the bosses that we see in A2, there's really no point for the ability to be there. And with the fact that we have so little skills in general, it would just be a lot better if we had a single target taunt.
Right. Yeah, and it just felt like he had no taunt regaining abilities whatsoever. He was not able to kind of pull aggro off of people easily. Adding to a different topic is from Nair. Says they were discussing if they wanted to do a mana based or stamina based in the beginning. So they're trying to still nail that part down. What are your thoughts?
I think,
and I'm just gonna share some opinions while you guys chat.
So
I think it should vary by the Oh, you go first. Guess first.
Like with Terra, with the thing I was complimenting them on is that I do like that they used a resource in order to be able to allow them to block for a certain amount of time without overly doing it and basically just negating ever the need to push a mitigation button. So I am down for a resource similar to that, something specific for the tank probably. I don't feel like taking away their mana is a very good idea when you mix it with other classes like Cleric that might have self-heal abilities or stuff like that, where it might increase the mana cost as a sort of like balancing thing. But a separate resource like what Terra does, like they could have stamina, as what some people were saying.
Yeah, I could see that. I again don't have any like response on this because I don't tank primarily.
Yeah,
but
I think I like the idea of the different classes, like the different secondary archetypes having their own separate, I guess, lore-based pool. I kind of like that idea, but I also kind of think it would be simpler if you just called it the same thing. But if they had their own separate pool, you could almost even say, like, if it's a tank mage, then their resource pool is mana. Their active blocking puts up a magic shield in front of them. Even if they have a full like metal shield, it requires some mana to use. If they're a tank, it's going to be stamina. If they're a tank fighter, maybe rage. And they can spend it to active block or they can spend it to attack.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, J-Rock. Welcome in. So Nazook says, I think a good MMO, one we've been missing for a while, for a very long time, is a game where the tank cannot easily pull aggro. This keeps everyone on their toes, which I think is a good thing rather than a mindless raiding we've been doing for 20 years. And I mean, I can definitely agree with that. I was just saying, it seemed like he was struggling a lot to do it, and this kind of goes into my whole thoughts of, you know, I would like to see what the threat meters are. Am I even gaining threat right now? Am I still losing threat? You know, or am I making no difference? That would be good feedback to have, I think. Yeah, I heard you. You giggling.
Grumpy old man. Yes.
I actually wanted to point out a few different ones. Gold Pipe says, I love rage as a resource. Black Magic says stamina for physically blocking with a shield or weapon, mana for magical shields or shields and weapons imbued with magic. I like that ideas. Welcome in, Black Magic. By the way, welcome in everybody. I apologize, we have not been welcoming you in individually. We are so very grateful you are here, and we are enjoying your feedback and your chat. This has been amazing for us. Thank you. Yeah, and I think threat meters are a must, you know. We like courage that Grit
for
uses.
Indicators, at least, if nothing else, because even if a tank has to spec into it in order to get that indicator, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Make it so I have to spec into it so I can tell who has threat and how much, and then I need to call out when people are getting too much. I'm okay with that. Just there needs to be some way, because if you're fighting somebody like in real life, you know when they're starting to get angry. And you know when they're starting to get angry at a certain person in the room, and you talk to that person in the room and you're like, yo, you should probably back down, they're getting pissed at you. It's an obvious physical, like, social cue. You know when somebody's getting angry at someone. So you should be able to see some kind of indicator when a creature in-game is getting mad, and you can tell that it's not just a weird glitchy thing where the AI is making it turn a little bit to the left or look over its shoulder. Like, it should be obvious.
Yeah, I think, exactly. Having an indicator is fine. But let's make holding aggro a challenge. Sure, yeah, make that a challenge. Absolutely, I'm for it. Like, the gameplay for the tank should be just as engaging as the gameplay for DPS and healers. I am there for that because, again, there's a lot of common, you know, face rolls, right? Oh, this class is such a face roll, you don't even have to try. And sure, there's probably going to be classes like that, but yeah, challenging but attainable, absolutely. You two, do you like the courage resource they discussed?
I don't think there was just enough about it. Like, it was only used for one ability that we already have a problem with. It's something that they can definitely use as a sort of resource, but currently the only use for it is for an ability you wouldn't ever use except as a panic.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it basically ended and we had to start gearing up for the show, I didn't get a chance to go back and really watch it again like I like to before we have a podcast on it.
They started so late as well, so
yeah, so I couldn't really go through and review and make sure I didn't miss anything, but I don't recall hearing much of anything beyond, it's a resource you generate and then this skill uses it. The end. Yeah,
Overthrow, I think we're pretty much in agreement with you. Overthrow says I'd have to rewatch the video and understand the courage or grit. So Livia Jima is elaborating, saying, do you like how it shows they will have multiple resources for class to balance, like courage?
Yeah, as long as they don't make it too terribly complicated and wonky, I'm okay with that, because I know I have this thing I gotta earn by doing that, and then I can spend it on this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's going to be one of those things, but I have to say, same. There's a lot of classes that they're going to have to be balancing for, it's going to be interesting. But grit is a toggle that gives you boosted defense stats in exchange for your speed and DPS. Thank you, J-Rock. I appreciate that breakdown.
It is also a toggle that is based on how much courage you had before the toggle as well.
Is that kind of a little bit like conviction, how many stacks of conviction you have before you use the ability, and then it does more healing or damage based off of that?
Yeah, so they said that it was supposed to be a toggleable with grit that would increase the amount of mitigation that you would get dependent on the stacks of courage that you had.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I liked that. I honestly, I found the stacks of just that system, I liked it. It was nice. It felt like a good use of resources. So being able to have stacks of courage and then spend it with grit, I think that's really cool. I think that's a smart use of self-created resources that aren't mana-based or rage-based. Vertec has been having issues with Bear on occasion because he doesn't get enough rage. I have mana issues sometimes, and I don't have any mana rejuvenation unless I stack a bunch of stats that help me with that. So I think it would be nice to have something like that. But kind of like what Livia Jima says, I noticed there was no meter or visual to see how many stacks of courage you have, unless they missed it. But I did notice, and I'm going to kind of put a pause on this. I've enjoyed this tank conversation, but this is a great jump off point into UI. I did notice that there was that little square of the whatever was used, and there was a small little outline that was counting down for the countdown instead of like a number. I really enjoyed that. The UI looks very clean, but I could go on and on and on, and I will go deeper into it. There's a few things I noted, but what was your overall initial impression with the UI?
Coming from A1, it's better. There's it's not just a black square for everything. However, I do feel like it is a little bit juxtaposed with the environment around it. It's clean, it's nice, it's concise. However, I do kind of like the UI to be around the same level of visual and environment as the environment itself. We're in an RP fantasy medieval world. We should also be able to see that within its UI elements, like with World of Warcraft does with its quest log.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry, that felt good. The hydrate and stretch, by the way, so you have to do both too. Tilly says, I'm happy with it. Thank you, Lizzie. I thought that was a really nice little smooth segue. But
yeah, I'd have to say I kind of agree. I like the way all the UI looks. I just think maybe a little bit more work needs to go into it to integrate it more with feeling the same as the environment and character art and all that stuff. It's,
yeah.
I think it looks good, but I think they need to tweak it a little bit to fit more seamlessly with the rest of everything else you see in front of you, especially if add-ons are not going to be a thing.
Yeah, I could see that.
At the very extreme, I would like to see maybe UI changes based on the class that you have. But
Ooh.
that's extreme because that's 64 different classes you have to UI design for.
Or they could make it kind of like LVUI has it, where you can set up your own profiles, right? So you can have your base profile of this is how I'd like it to look, and then tweak it for each profile of your character. It would be really cool for me as a healer to pull the party from the very side, because again, if you think about this, Steven usually plays on ultra wide, Vertec plays on an ultra wide. That's very far out of your viewpoint at this point. So what I would like to do is I'd like to grab that, drag it in a little bit closer towards where the center of the screen is, so I can see what I'm doing. I can see that. I can see what's being casted. All of my skills. I like a very centralized thing. But I also take advantage of mouse over, where it disappears and then you mouse over the bars so that they come back up, but otherwise they're not interrupting your gameplay. And then the other mouse over where you like hover over somebody and you deal damage or you heal them. Those are my favorite ways of playing. And I think being able to shrink down that mini map in the corner, because for me it doesn't need to be that big unless I'm looking for something very particular, like a profession trainer. But my favorite thing to notice, and I got really excited when I saw this. For those of you that know, I played Horizon Zero Dawn. When you look left and right, and also other games, the compass is above the mini map, and it has the lines, and it shows you just how far, like northwest, west you're looking. And I was really excited that that was there, because that was a nice indicator of if it says, hey, the mob's to the northwest, and you're just sitting there spinning, like, is it my northwest or is it the game's northwest? Is it northwest to where the town is, or the direction I'm facing? Like, because if you were to face a direction already and you were like, okay, I think northwest would mean a little bit towards the left instead of the right, and then you went that way, that could be southeast for all you know. So just having that compass would be nice. But yeah, sorry, super hard tangent. My gosh, can you tell this is my area?
But yeah, Iscaruth, in response to your UI thing, to make your really far extreme a little less extreme, so they're already working on character or class identities and archetype identities as far as symbols and stuff like that goes, right? And coloring. What if your UI, you could turn on an option to where it would auto adjust your UI to have symbols and visual aspects of your primary class, but the coloring of the second.
See, that would be
then
preferable.
You'd only need 8.
The comment that Chibi just highlighted right now, the Final Fantasy XIV has a expansive UI customization. You can move anything on the screen. You can add stuff onto the screen. Not only that, but they also have like 3 separate ways of expressing yourself. They have a portrait system that happens before the start of a dungeon. They have a adventure plate, which is kind of just like a little placard. It's like your FBI agent card, where it tells everybody some different things, including your search. It's really nice to have all that kind of stuff, because it definitely makes the character your character. And I would think that would be something they'd want to invest in, considering how, with the way the game currently is and what they plan it to be, it's not going to be very alt friendly.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And somebody was kind of getting a little upset, like, what does this mean for your ults? And I'm like, the reality is it's going to be so slow for you to level. You're probably not going to have ults. Oh, no, the topic was, what is stopping me from making a bunch of ults to get the professions done that I need help with, instead of grouping up with other people? And that's kind of why we're saying, like, there would not be really a good enough reason to have a bunch of ults like that. Yeah, you may have one ult, but that would be much later, because it's going to take you so long just to get through this one character to max level. But the average human lifespan will stop you. But I wanted to touch on a few things. Tilly says, from what Steven says, the UI will be fully customizable to a surprising degree, making things smaller, adding things, taking things off. And yes, absolutely. I've seen multiple times in the forums where Steven and the Intrepid team have reached out and said, hey, What kind of things for other games have you preferred? Or, hey, that's a great idea. Maybe we'll consider adding that into our UI things. And it does show that they're listening. I don't know if anybody else suggested that same compass thing, but I know I for one mentioned it a few times, and I was really happy to see it included. And I know that they want to know what you want in there so that they can include it, because they don't want you to grab an add-on. They want you to just use whatever they give you to be able to move everything around. It's one of those things where the more input you give them, or the more ideas that you have, the better. So having things like profiles, a profile selection where you can customize it on one and use it across it and then adjust it slightly for that character, I think that would be really awesome. Again, probably not going to have too many alts, but you could maybe kind of like LVUI. I've been asked a few times when I'm streaming, hey, I really like your overlay with your LVUI. How do I get mine to look like that? And I'm like, oh, hey, you know what? I actually, like, previously I used to make my own, but I grabbed this from somebody else's string. Grabs string, gives it to the person. I think that'd be an awesome thing to implement for Ashes. Because if you like the way my UI looks, I can be able to give you a script that you could just import that's given by Ashes, and it will make your layout look the same. It's up to you to figure out what you're doing with your stuff from there. But I think that would be cool for showing it. And people could share that with the community, like, hey, here's screenshots of my UI. If you like it, here's the script for it. You know, I could see that being something that people could share. But that's also a side tangent. The question was, how do we like the UI? I like the UI a lot. I feel like it does need some work. Some of it you want to be there and noticeable, but not the main focus. But I did want to point out something I saw in chat, and I wanted your guys' opinion on this, is the visibility of the archetypes. It was very clear and easy to tell who is playing what, given the icon in the circle on the left-hand side of their names. What are your thoughts?
They're all right. It's okay. For me personally, though, I don't really like. It goes back to the whole other UI design choices. The neon colors of the class, I can understand. It's a nice placeholder. It's very easy to tell who you're playing with. However, I would much prefer something that is more attuned with what I know to be medieval fantasy. It would be something with a lot of gilding. It'd be a lot of like old parchment looking stuff, or maybe even like a metal sign, something that indicates it well without being too dejected from the entire environmental storytelling that he's trying to do.
Right.
And while I do understand it is a UI and the whole point of it is to be kind of dejected in a sense, I feel like if you can mitigate it with proper UI arts, then it makes it a little bit nicer on the eyes. It's all the little things.
Yeah, I agree. Right.
Yeah. So which part of the UI specifically were you referring to again? Sorry, I tried to bring it to mind. I apologize, people. I told you I was sick. I'm not
the
feeling
last
great,
thing
so.
I was referencing was the player icon on the left hand of the UI frame for the player individually for the party. But in general, your response works as well. And sorry guys, I think it's buffering. Our internet is like sometimes great. But also Twitch is not the best for grabbing these lives from, but they didn't have it out on YouTube yet, so we couldn't grab it from that.
Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, I noticed those, and it didn't take me too long to figure out who was who. But at the same time, I think I don't think they were necessarily needed, especially that big. But I mean, it fit with the UI, so it wasn't like an eyesore. Anything.
Yeah.
It was just they kind of existed. They did their own thing. I think the name of the player is always enough for me, but I tend to have minimalistic individual UI components when I can use add-ons. I tend to have minimalistic individual components, but I just have a lot of components because I need all the info on my screen.
Yeah.
Do the tank thing, I gotta know, like, you know, who's taking threat, who's healing, like, who do I gotta stay near, who's far away. I need my raid frames to fade out when I get too far away from them. I need all the stuff on there. I figure if it's something I would know if I were in that situation, I should probably have it on my screen so I can decipher it instead of estimating in feet the video game atmosphere in front of me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, I'm having issues with featured chat, so give me a second. Same as healer. Yeah. Welcome in, by the way. So a few things. Livia Jima says, Chibi, I think it's only okay with the level of customization they claim the archetypes will have. I don't know if it will be enough to show what to expect, since two people may both be the same tank main with same secondary and still not be the same type of tank, which can lead to assumptions being made incorrectly. And I could see that. Somebody else also said that they preferred color. I think it's easier to tell by the color than by the icon, and I agree. I see that with WoW a lot. I can tell somebody's class just by the color of their name with my LVUI, and that just immediately, like, okay, class color, got it. Like, I know who somebody is. I may not know what their main spec is or their off spec is, but I know what their class is in general. Black Magic says, speaking of UI, I like your avatars, but your mouths are too small to see who's speaking at the moment. If you guys could have something like a mug with the golden feather icon in the middle of it that shows up next to your avatars or name whenever you speak, that would be cool. Black Magic, with the new UI, I have it planned where we're going to be a larger part of the video, and it'll be a lot easier to see who's talking. So thank you for that feedback, though. It's very helpful. This is less than ideal in terms of the VTubers, but it's a middle step. It's a stepping stone towards the new overlay that we have coming soon. And then Nazik says, follow-up question, should you be able to identify the class of an enemy in PvP as quickly as identifying an ally? Not sure how I feel on this. I feel like on a general sense of PvP, yes, because then you're able to start format, because like the important thing of PvP is getting as much information in as quickly as possible. And so having the ability to know what the other, like, broad idea of what the other player is in terms of a primary archetype, I think would help you begin forming plans and ideas for mitigating any damage that could be incoming. So if I see a mage, I'm aware that they have a lot of CC's ability, at least in World of Warcraft, and I begin planning, okay, how do I get out of CC's? Do I have my CC cooldown? If I pop that, am I going to live very long? Do I have anything to help me, like, live beyond 2 seconds once I am CC'd? Things like that. And I immediately began What are you doing?
Not doing anything.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually really Vertec. Thank you. But there's a lot of planning that has to go around it. And you have to begin kind of thinking on the fly, which I kind of like about PvP. It's just more like, because I'm not very good at it, I suck and I get upset, but I like the thinking on your feet aspect that PvP brings. And I think that's important in a PvE scenario when facing a boss that you don't know the mechanics of. As soon as you begin to see a mechanic happening, you got to be able to think on your feet, like, okay, I've seen it now. I need to get out of that. That's bad. And then keep moving and try to live as long as you can from that.
And in terms of talking about the PvP scape for being able to see the class of another person, that's not really something that you can shirk, because like you were talking about, there are certain classes that do different things. Like, while you'll have a mage that has a lot of CC for a DPS, something cannot be said the same for a shaman, which you would know a shaman based on the enhancements that they would use on their clubs. They're coming over to bonk you on the head. They got Wind Fury. You got to be prepared for that.
Right.
So you're not going to really be taking a look at the weapons that they have or what they're wearing first. The first thing you're going to be looking at is their name. because that is what you're going to see at the start of like even just an arena match, because you guys are going to start on equal sides at the same time. You should be able to see their name and what they're playing so that you can plan accordingly, because this is more about the skill of the player itself rather than the I don't know what the other side of that coin would be, because it really is just a lot about skill, and being able to discern someone's class and being able to react accordingly doesn't necessarily give you an edge, but it does show your level of skill in being able to identify the abilities of class, because most people that casually play PvP wouldn't even begin to think about that. They would just think, I will now spam the button that does a lot of damage and hopefully I won't die.
Yeah,
then the question comes in though on if it should be immediately apparent on exactly which of the 64 classes, which means they need to make 64 icons easily recognizable, or if they should just do the 8 base archetypes and you need to keep on your toes and know that you have a tank of some sort coming at you, or you have a summoner of some sort that just rounded a corner from the building.
I feel like the best way that you can do that is to color code the Holy Trinity. You have the healer, which can be green, you have the tank, which can be blue, and you have the DPS, which can be red. And you have that as the back part of the emblem itself. I'm totally stealing this by Final Fantasy, by the way, because that's how they do it. They have the background color, which is their role, and then you have what class they're playing, because a white mage is similar to a sage in that they both share that they are a healer role, but they'll have different emblems based on that. So maybe what they could do is they can have the emblem of the base class, but the background colors can change depending on the secondary that you choose. Like there could be a diagonal line just right on the icon where it shows like red and blue. So you're like, oh, well, they're a DPS, but they seem to have picked up tank as well. Or they would be green and red, and you'd be like, oh, they're a healer, but they have more DPS capabilities. There's only so much that you can do with the off the glance look based on someone's class, but like just off the top of my head, that would be the only way I could go about it.
That might be another way to or another instance of implementing the symbol from the main primary archetype and the color from the secondary. That'd be easily distinguishable by people who pay attention too.
I agree too, but the other thing that somebody brought up a really good point. So Dak Drifter says the other visual indicators will be necessary for colorblind folks, because I think even Steven's colorblind, right? So having that is nice for us visual color seeing people, but having a non-color oriented indicator would be, I think, important. It could even come down to a different instead of being a circle, it could be like a diamond or something. I don't know. Some other way of indicating it. I don't know. It's one of those things that like I can't really tackle from this perspective. Real quick, we're gonna kind of wrap it up here because as you can, again, Vertek and I a little bit under the weather, but Tilly says, I think being able to tell who you're fighting is important. I play for honor, and the best way to fight other characters is by knowing those possible movesets and combos. And I think that is really, really important. Yeah, and did you want to talk about the Steven thing? I see you put it in here. Yeah, I added it in at least as in case somebody didn't see it. But Overthrow mentioned that Steven in Discord said that feedback has been heard loud and clear. We recorded the video and it will be uploading shortly. ETA is probably 2 hours. And we will probably do, I don't know if you want to do this, Vertek, but Livia Dima, I do see your other question about thinking if people, like, we'll actually end with your question. But if we didn't get to any of your other questions, don't worry. We have so many of them pinned. This is actually amazing because now we have a bunch of content to go off of for Monday. But for those of you that are new here, hi, we do our live podcast here on Fridays. And then tomorrow I'll be doing in the morning around 10, 11 Eastern time in the morning. I'll be doing World of Warcraft content with Vertec probably, or solo if he's not filling up to it. But it's called Coffee Quest, where we're kind of waking up, we're playing some MMOs, doing some questing, and also questing for that caffeine, because, you know, caffeine themed. And then Sunday I'm running D&D, but Monday night we're doing our Tavern Talk, which is where we kind of just sit and chat about anything. And we have a whole lot from you guys to sit and chat about. So if we didn't get to it today, we will definitely be getting to it Monday. But just to kind of end this part, kind of going back to tank, do you think from Livio Jima that people will pick up tanking if it's hard to pull aggro? A tanking problem will really hurt content.
I think I was just responding to this one actually in text.
Okay.
So to kind of go back off of the comment that I made in the reply, it's something of a weird thing to grasp. If someone is really that into wanting to start tanking, they'll learn how to deal with what they got for A2. I don't imagine we're going to have so little abilities in release that it's going to actually be very difficult to hold aggro. It just seems a little daunting right now for new players, especially after this showcase. Who knows? Maybe this one that they just recorded and they'll be posting soon will be a lot better showcase, and we'll actually be able to see proper aggro grabbing and aggro holding, and that can kind of lead people into wanting to try it out. Because I'm a guy that plays all roles. I played tank in Cataclysm, like I said. I played healer in Mists of Pandaria, and I played DPS for most of my time in Final Fantasy. I've done all roles. So it's one of those things where I am comfortable with doing every single one, but knowing a person that just starts out, I feel like they're going to be a little disenfranchised versus other MMOs if they were to try tanking there.
Yeah, and I kind of put out in text already, basically the same kind of thing. Like, I feel it should be something that's constantly managed, and it does take some effort to do so, but it shouldn't be on the, you need to be a top tier player to manage your threat. There should be some windows for error, some windows for moving and repositioning and doing other things besides just hitting your threat buttons off of cooldown all the time.
Right, absolutely. And I just want to say before you guys leave, we're going to be reading over, because that's what we do. We like to spread love over to other people within the community. So don't go just yet. Please join us for raiding. You also earn extra points here if you do that. So you can spend it on all sorts of things. Good night, Veggie. Have a good rest. Tilly says, I don't think people will. Taming is already daunting to people who aren't tanks. Tanking is already daunting to people who aren't tanks normally. I wouldn't want a shortage of tanks because it can be hard to find a group. It'd be good for me as a tank main, but there are also times I may want to do my own thing. So yeah. But I guess just to kind of wrap it all up, you guys really weren't a fan of this live stream, and Steven seems to have heard that and is trying to make amends with the video that they're currently working on putting out in a couple of hours. And I mean, first impressions really last, so we'll see how the recovery rate is of this. But you guys, I want to take you on over to the Chaos Crew. Any last takeaways from the stream before we raid over?
Don't give Intrepid too hard of a time. They are still doing all right. Their development is on track, in my opinion, when it comes to, developing something as crazy as an MMO. They're still consistent. Despite the shortcomings that we might have gotten from this live stream, I'm still confident that they can turn out a proper product that I will enjoy.
There's Heck.
I'm gonna have basically the same setup there. Like, everybody makes mistakes, everybody falters at some points, and this is just one of those times. I think with how this video was presented today, and I think they can come back. They've done some really good things, and they made good progress. They've improved on many of their mistakes in the past, like promising dates and whatnot, and now they just say, hey, we're we're gonna work to getting this done, and they show us they're getting stuff done. So
Yeah, absolutely.
definitely criticism is expected for today's presentation, but as long as it's constructive and not done in just a terrible way.
Yeah.
And there, yes, you'll always overreact, so that's expected from you.
My takeaway is that, I'm really happy that you guys had the confidence in saying that you liked or did not like something. And, we as a community-oriented podcast, we're here for that. We're here to give you guys a voice. We're here to help make sure that, the community is heard. And ultimately, we're interested in what you guys like or dislike. And I know a lot of you said that you liked it. And I'm sorry we didn't really get to that side of things, but we will in the future. And all in all, you guys could have been making your own podcast. You could have been going out on the forums and ranting, but you hung out with us, and we really appreciated it. And Ruth, it was really nice having you on again.
I do really appreciate being here, and come back as always. You have me next year, January?
Possibly, yeah. Maybe we'll have an Alpha 2 to play by then. But
please don't say by then. Oh,
well,
by then.
I mean, like, better than after then.
Okay, maybe next time we'll be doing we're gonna have a podcast and then go right into playing some alpha content right after.
But please join us in raiding over to Jamie Chaos. If you guys don't know them, Chaos and Lace are a couple, a married couple, just like Vertek and I are. But they focus a little bit less on formatted stuff, and they're kind of ADHD with it, and so they call themselves Tangents of Creation. So just heads up, they can get very interesting with their topics, but they're a really cool couple. So
thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you everybody for joining us. Could have spent your time anywhere you spent it with us. And Krusty, you are quite very welcome, and thank you for joining us. And thank you everybody for so many chats. It's been fantastic. Love you all. Catch you next time.
See you next time. Bye.